You may have heard about the gripping new true crime book that's just hit shelves, Never See Them Again, by veteran author M. William Phelps, delves into one of the most shocking murders in recent American history. With a case that took the Houston Police Department 3 whole years to crack, this book will have you on the edge of your seat, and the twist that'll blow your mind? The killer was someone they least expected, a 17-year-old girl. Born into a life of loss and tragedy on Long Island, New York, Paolilla faced hardship from a young age. At just 2 years old, she lost her father, and soon after, her grandfather and great-grandmother passed away. Struggling to cope, she was sent to live with her grandparents. Her struggles only continued as she was diagnosed with alopecia, leading to a loss of confidence and self-esteem, masked by the wigs she wore. She became a victim of merciless bullying in high school, hiding her bald head with outrageous wigs and poorly drawn eyebrows. But everything changed when Tiffany Rowell and Rachel Coloraudis entered her life. These two popular girls at Clear Lake High School in Houston, Texas, took Paolilla under their wing and transformed her. They taught her the art of fashion and makeup, helped her pick out flattering wigs, and by the time they were finished, Paolilla had been transformed into a beautiful and confident young woman. The once shy young girl began to flourish, eventually being voted Miss Irresistible by her peers. But little did they know, this newfound confidence would lead to a dark and deadly outcome. As Paolilla entered her teenage years, she started dating 21-year-old Christopher Lee Snyder, but little did anyone know, the calm before the storm was just that. The events that followed would change the lives of those involved forever. Paolilla's obsession with Snyder was known by all, described as a psycho by Snyder's sister. Paolilla would sleep on Snyder's front lawn after their fights. Rowell and Coloraudis tried to intervene and urged Paolilla to break away from Snyder. However, it was too late, as the two young women were already targeted by the jealous duo. On July 18, 2003, 17-year-old Christine Paolilla and her beau, 21-year-old Christopher Lee Snyder, made their way to the home of Tiffany Rowell. Little did they know, this visit would ignite a night of terror and bloodshed. Inside the house, Tiffany and her friends, Rachel Coloraudis, Marcus Priscilla, and Adelbert Sanchez were present. According to Paolilla's account, the couple had gone to the house to score some drugs, but an argument between Snyder and Priscilla quickly escalated. In a fit of rage, Snyder allegedly went on a killing spree, taking the lives of all 4 of the innocent individuals in the house. The Clear Lake massacre shook the community to its core, leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake. The shocking events that took place that night would change the lives of those involved forever. The police uncovered a sinister and twisted motive behind the killings, a deep-seated jealousy that consumed 17-year-old Christine Paolilla and her drug-addicted boyfriend. The brutal murders of 18-year-olds Tiffany Rowell and Rachel Coloraudis, along with Rowell's boyfriend and his cousin, were committed with such ferocity that the police concluded it was a result of a personal vendetta. When Coloraudis was found to be alive after being shot 12 times, Paolilla showed no mercy. She grabbed her pistol, using it as a hammer to bash her best friend's head. The scene inside Rowell and Coloraudis' home was described as a clear-eyed execution by police. With 40 shots fired, most aimed at the female victims, Paolilla showed intense personal animosity towards her best friends. The distinctive overkill in the female victims was a clear indication of the killer's intense jealousy toward them. True crime writer M. William Phelps shines a light on the heart-wrenching story in his book, describing it as a tale of a young woman plagued by drug abuse and jealousy, who turned on the only people who wouldn't betray her. Paolilla and Snyder escaped the site after the assault. Snyder is said to have driven Paolilla to work less than an hour later. According to investigators, Paolilla's victims died around 3:25 p.m., and that same day, Paolilla reported for work at Walgreens before 4 p.m. After Raul and Coloradus were made public, Paolilla exhibited indications of anxiety in front of her family. She allegedly skipped the funerals because of her melancholy. Paolilla sought treatment for her addiction in 2004. Authorities imprisoned Snyder at about the same time for other crimes. After that, their romance came to an end. The senseless and gruesome crimes left the police stumped for 3 long years with no clues pointing to a 17-year-old friend as the mastermind behind such a horrific crime. The police believe that the murders were likely linked to the drug underworld, with the deceased girls involved in various illicit activities. But despite following over 400 leads, the investigation hit a dead end, with the focus on Priscilla's drug associations. After a few years, life continued as usual for Paolilla, who ended up in a drug rehab facility in Kerrville, Texas, where she met a lifelong heroin addict called Justin Rott, while Snyder was imprisoned in a Kentucky jail on an old auto theft warrant. It was love, and the two got married soon after. After getting hitched, they purchased a condo with a $360,000 trust fund bequeathed to them by her late father. They only spent a little time nesting. 3 long years had passed since the grisly murders, and still, justice eluded the victims. But in July 2006, a fateful tip-off changed everything. The anonymous tip led the police to a dark, dingy hotel room in San Antonio, Texas. There, they found the notorious drug-addled couple Paolilla and her then-husband, Justin Rott, who had been living in squalor for the past 8 months. At first, Paolilla vehemently denied any involvement in the murders, but it wasn't long before Rott spilled the beans during his interrogation. Unfortunately for Paolilla, on one fateful day, everything changed. It happened when Paolilla caught a news report on the anniversary of the unsolved killings of her dearest friends on television. Rott was invited in to see, and as police sketches appeared on the screen, Paolilla started to lose it. "Oh my," she exclaimed as she walked through the living room. "Oh my," repeatedly. After that, she halted and turned to face her new spouse. "Does that look like me?" she questioned. The sight had sent her into a panicked frenzy, and she had confessed the truth to her husband, painting herself as a passive player in the tragic events that took place that afternoon. The pair fled together while remaining a unit. They settled into a La Quinta Inn room and started an incredible drug binge that was as filthy as it was loud. They subsisted on Cheez-Its, Reese's peanut butter cups, and Coke, as they daily injected $500 worth of heroin and cocaine. Over the weeks, the room became littered with blood, vomit, their dog's waste, and more than 100 needles, since they never left it and never let housekeeping in. When the police finally caught them, her husband revealed that Paolilla had confessed to him that she was an active participant in the grisly slayings of her closest friends. He claimed she had returned to the house and savagely beat Coloradus to death with a gun. Quote, "When she mentioned it to me, it was so overwhelming. I couldn't believe she was the person I married," Rott said. "I didn't understand it. It was so much of a shock, and I was in denial." It was a shock to everyone when Paolilla was finally arrested as a suspect, as it was rare for women, especially teenagers, to commit such heinous crimes. Paolilla had flown under the radar for years. After the police detained Paolilla, they focused on Chris Snyder, who had recently been released from custody. Authorities discovered Snyder had disappeared when they searched his residence. Later, investigators located his body in some adjacent woods. After learning from acquaintances that Houston police were on their way to arrest Snyder on accusations carrying the death penalty, it is said that Snyder had carried soda and medicines with him. Medical examiners determined that Snyder had taken too many medications. 2 firearms were discovered in Snyder's safe, and they were later connected to the 2003 murders in Clear Lake City. On October 13, 2008, justice was finally served. Christine Paolilla was found guilty of 4 counts of capital murder. Paolilla was sentenced to an automatic life sentence for her part in the murders. The Supreme Court had ruled that executing juveniles who committed murder was unconstitutional. As she was led away from the courtroom in tears, the families of the victims finally felt that justice had been served. Despite her defense's claims that Snyder was the sole responsible party, prosecutor Rob Freyer pointed out that the horrible event couldn't have taken place without Paolilla's involvement. Her stepfather, Thomas Dick, however, maintained that Snyder was the real predator and that his daughter was paying for someone else's sins. Although Paolilla always blamed Snyder for the murders, and her accounts of the murders were inconsistent, with the help of Roth's testimony and other evidence, she was eventually convicted of first-degree capital murder and given a life sentence without the possibility of parole for 40 years. The reason for Paolilla's actions remain a mystery, but Snyder's sister believes jealousy played a role. To this day, the truth behind the why remains locked away with Paolilla, who continues to show no remorse or interest in explaining her heinous actions. But due to her youthful age at the time of the killings, she escaped the death penalty and instead was sentenced to life in prison behind bars at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas, with parole eligibility in 2046. Paolilla tried to cover up the brutal slayings she and Snyder committed, lying to the police about how the murders took place. However, her story was debunked when an HPD firearms expert revealed that the guns used in the crime could not have gone off as Paolilla claimed. Her then-husband Roth provided devastating testimony, exposing how Paolilla repeatedly confessed her role in the murders to him, and how they were both consumed by their heroin addiction. The victims each suffered multiple gunshot wounds and significant blunt force trauma to the head. Juror Cliff Sheets, who had initially voted for acquittal, eventually changed his mind after the contradictions in Paolilla's statement became clear. Although the defense tried to argue that Paolilla's statements were influenced by her addiction to heroin, the jury was not convinced. A defense psychiatrist spoke about Paolilla's troubled upbringing, which included the loss of both her uncle and father, and her mother's descent into drugs. He argued that Paolilla was vulnerable to dangerous influences such as Snyder, and was in no state of mind to make rational decisions during her police interrogation, as she was undergoing heroin withdrawal. In the police video, the doctors observed that Paolilla appeared to be in a state of distress, incapable of making reasonable decisions. Psychiatrist Gail Saltz delved into the mind of the killer, offering a chilling explanation for the murders. Saltz speculated that Paolilla may have felt envious and resentful towards her friends, who seemed to effortlessly receive acceptance and kindness while she struggled. This intense envy and jealousy could have triggered her aggression, leading her to lash out and punish them for what they had. In the end, the guilty verdict gave the families of the 4 victims some semblance of closure and allowed them to finally move forward with their lives. The verdict in the case of the Clear Lake killings serves as a reminder of the complexities and consequences of human actions. The concept of guilt and responsibility is subjective and often influenced by various factors such as addiction, fear, and manipulation. In this case, both the accused and the victims were deeply entangled in a web of violence and drugs. It is a poignant reminder that every decision we make has far-reaching consequences, both for ourselves and those around us. This tragedy also highlights the importance of seeking help and breaking free from the cycles of addiction and violence. Now that you know all the facts of the case, what are your thoughts on the case? Do you believe Paolilla was alone to blame, or was she beguiled by Snyder? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to hit the bell icon and subscribe.